Hello and welcome everyone to part 2 of Introduction to Growing Trees and CTNs. So part 1, for those of you who may have missed it, is currently on our YouTube channel and the Growing Diversity webpage as well. So I'll share links to those if you need them. Please do feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you're from and ask any questions as we go along. We're hoping that we'll have more time. We're planning to have more time for a Q&A in this session than there was last session, because there was so much to cover last time. So do make the most of that opportunity to ask Adam questions while he's with us. And do check the chat also for links to future Growing Diversity events that we've got planned as well. So I think that's it. I'm not going to share the bio for Adam again. That's in the first part. So I'll just hand on over to you, Adam, if you're ready to go. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody again. And if you're returning after the last one, thank you for continuing with this. So I'm going to share a screen. You'll see the presentation. We'll go through the presentation. It's always good to get some feedback, so I'd like to hear from you at the end as well, or in the chat, as to how you think it's gone, because when I'm presenting, I don't get to see anybody. So it's quite difficult gauging reactions and so forth. All I can see is my presentation. So yeah, at the end, it would be good to get some constructive criticism if you're willing. So I'm going to share a screen. And then should be loading now. Could you confirm that you can see this? Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Right, we shall just roll straight into it then. So this is part 2 of the Introduction to Growing Trees, as we've stated. And just gonna, right, moving on now. I just need to minimize something, so it's covering the screen slightly. Okay. So in part 1, we looked at what's grown why, and also how many trees we would grow. We looked at soils and composting, various things for growing trees in, looked at ground preparation if you're doing bare root, and weed control. And then we delved a bit more into the seed collection, and particularly around how to do the hard to grow species, and looking at stratification and germination of those species. And then a little bit on picking out and potting on. So today we're moving on from that, going to very rapidly look at biosecurity and regulation, good hygiene within the nursery, look at managing your waste, irrigation, and different watering techniques, looking after your plants, and then a bit on P&D, pest and disease, and finally planting out, pruning and grading, lifting, getting those trees out of the nursery. So at the moment we've sort of got to, and looked at all of the seed collection and growing stuff. Now we're going to be sort of how we advance their growth and growth rates, and then look at getting the trees out of the nursery at the end. So with the biosecurity and the regulation, the commercial nurseries have this off pat, and DEFRA's very hot on it, and there's various accreditation schemes like Plant Healthy and UK Island Source and Grow, which the Woodland Trust do to assure their procurement teams of biosecurity when they're purchasing trees. And some of this is cascaded down to community tree nurseries, but quite often there is concern within the industry that a lot of people are growing trees and donating them, moving them on, without due consideration or in any detail on biosecurity and regulation. So the UK considers biosecurity, UK government considers biosecurity about prevention of introduction and spread of these harmful organisms, focusing particularly obviously on non-natives and these insects or disease-causing organisms, pathogens, as viruses, bacteria, and fungi. And I put those elements in bold because viruses, bacteria, and fungi you rarely see before there's a problem. So this is why biosecurity is important, and it's to take some simple actions, because you don't actually know if those viruses or bacteria fungi are present until they manifest themselves as an issue. And this chart here just shows how the increase in pest and disease outbreaks has rapidly increased since 2000. And it's vastly jumped up. And since 2000, there's been 12 new diseases and 7 new insects, which have basically come into this country. And some of those have come through plant products, which have been brought into the country. Others have come in through wood waste and things like on pallets and stuff like that, packaging materials. And then the others have just come because of potentially climatic change. So the conditions are good for them here. So they've come over here. But it is causing devastation. Most of us remember the effects of Dutch elm disease and the impact that has and still has now. And then we're more familiar with ash dieback and so forth. But there is a huge number of other things out there that are present now in this country, which are having an impact on trees. So, sorry, I went the wrong way there. And it's not just trees that it's going to have an impact on in terms of trees in towns or forestry. It's also all of these pests and diseases additional affect our food crops, our ornamental stuff, fruiting crops and so forth. So it is significant and something that should be considered seriously. There are various control elements, and one of them is stated in the law. It's called the Forest Reproductive Materials. And in essence, they use the word marketing forest products, that being plants, seed source, things like that. Then you should follow certain rules. And this is all about track and trace. So planting stock can be traced, it says there, back to the source of its basic material, i.e. the tree or the woodland area from which the seed is collected. And it applies to 46 tree species, not all tree species. There are some native tree species that are not on that list. They're considered voluntary as opposed to mandatory species to work. So the classic forest trees like oak and beech and alder and birch are all covered by this. Poplars, willows species, but not species like hawthorn, blackthorn, and so forth. So there is a list, and it can be viewed online. And within that framework, you would register with the Forest Commission. You'd register your notification to collect seed. So that is, I'm going here and I'm going to collect some seed, and then you would tell them how much seed you have collected, and then you would, if those seeds have been grown into trees, and once you've got those trees growing, you would apply for a master seed certificate. And the idea is all there. This is a unique identification which goes with that batch of seed or that batch of trees. It's not for one seed or one tree, but it's for batches of the same species collected from the same area within the same year. And then when you issue those trees, sell them is obviously because that's the framework that this has all been built around, because community tree nurseries haven't been as extensive as they have become in recent years. It has been built around a commercial framework. Then you issue your person who's buying trees with what's called a supply notice, and on that are these numbers, so that if there was ever an issue with those trees and a plant health issue, then it could be quickly identified where those trees came from and where the seed source was. And so in the work that I've done over the years with community tree nurseries, I recognize a lot of community tree nurseries will not formally work with the FRM, but I would really strongly advise you to keep ideally a digital record of the seed collections, where they're collected, where that seed's located, and then where those plants are within the nursery and when they've been grown. And it's also good practice to do this just to keep, so you know what's happening to your seed. So year on year, you can compare your notes, particularly around germination rates, timing of germination, different stratification techniques to try and break dormancy and so forth. And also what you do in terms of when you're growing those trees, watering regimes, things like that. It's useful to keep all of those notes to help you in future years. And once those trees are going out, it's also good to keep a record of where those trees have gone or to who those trees have gone. So even if you're not doing the formal filling in the forms online for the Forestry Commission and so forth, or you're not plant health accreditation schemes, these kinds of things, which require you to do that, then record keeping is very, very valuable. So looking at hygiene within the nursery, so these are things, all of these things are potential vectors. So these are all things where insects, pathogens, viruses, bacteria could come into the nursery. It's where they could reside and overwinter. So it could be within your pots, and if you're reusing pots and trays and things like that, could be on surfaces. If you've got tables where you are filling seed trays and so forth, and they're not swept up and wiped down, and you've got old compost on there, then they could be that could be their home, their potential. It could be where you collect water, particularly if water isn't being covered, because Phytophthora, for example, that can reside in that water, and then when you're watering your trees, what happens is that you're just spreading it around the nursery. If you are buying trees in, then also it could be that it's in the compost materials of those trees. If they're not coming from a tree nursery that practices good biosecurity, it could come in on your feet, could be on your tools, could be again in wood waste and so forth. So it could be all over the place basically, but there are really simple measures to minimize the risk. So stop it at the gate is the first thing. Don't let it come into the nursery. And so by having a boot wash or a disinfectant mat, using the agricultural disinfectant solutions, then that's it's very simple. If it's on your feet, or it's or on the wheels of a vehicle or anything like that, then these washes do reduce the risk. And something like Virkon, you can create an area and you can pour it on the ground after use, and neutralizes, and it's absolutely fine. But I would just identify an area for that. Soak and wash any plant pots, any trays, anything like that you're going to reuse. Use a simple bleach solution, 1 to 10, so 1 of bleach to 9 parts water, or vinegar, 1 of vinegar to 4 parts water. They work, or you could go and buy something off the shelf like Jay's Fluid or Citrox and use those as directed. Keeping your tools clean. Obviously, if you're using your tools and then you're moving, you're working with one species of plant, and then you go off and work with another species of plant, you don't know whether you're transferring something there. So clean tools at the end of the day is always good, and good practice as well, and keeps the tools in good nick, reducing costs and replacements and so forth. Definitely if you're using pruning tools like secateurs, and if you're pruning out root pruning, or if you're going to be doing pruning out anything that you've noticed which is not what you want. So if you've got some canker or something, or you pruning off those parts of the live tissue, then you really should be cleaning those blades with methylated spirits or similar after your cuts, particularly when you're moving from one species to another, or after you've dealt with the issue that you're trying to remove. Wipe down the surfaces mentioned. Green waste and other rubbish, just don't allow it to accumulate around the nursery. So either compost effectively, or have a storage space, and then when that storage space is at capacity, remove it from the nursery and have that storage space away from where you're growing trees. And I appreciate wood chip. People use wood chip as mulch, or they put it down on paths. But do you know the source of that wood chip? Has the tree surgeon been commissioned a job and they're felling diseased trees, and then they've thrown that through the chipper, and then they've offered you the wood chip, but actually all of the pathogens are still within the chip, within the wood chip. So that could come into your tree nursery. And as I said before, buying plants, if you do buy plants to enhance stock or to start stock, then get it from accredited, reputable sellers. With your waste, so waste, green waste or cardboard or waste timber, things like that, what should we be doing? And again, I say this, if you don't bring it into the nursery, then you immediately hugely reduce your issues. But if you are bringing waste into the nursery to reuse it, for example, it's fair that people want to use pellets and things to make compost heaps or storage areas, stuff like that. You want to bring cardboard in, things like that. Then just check it for any biosecurity issues. So if you see timber is full of sort of holes from larvae or something like that, don't use it. Burn it or get it properly destroyed. But if it's not, then put it in this quarantine, this storage area until you use it. Don't just keep it spread and lying around all over the nursery. And weeds we've talked a little bit about, but hot composting works very well to reduce seed and kill off viruses and pathogens and so forth that might be on those leaves, you know. And if not, then definitely dispose of it properly. And cardboard as well. Cardboard is very good if you're using no-dig solutions, or if you want to use it as a weed suppressant, something like that. You're obviously potentially introducing as well into composting because you've got your browns and your greens, you've got a hot compost. Then again, it's worth just checking that there's nothing in it. It's unlikely, it's highly unlikely, but it is definitely worth a look. The wood packaging, you may hear about wood packaging material and the ISPM 15. In essence, it's a simple thing. Now, since Brexit and there's this new new symbols to designate on wood packaging material that it has been heat treated and that it's compliant. And you should probably find any pallets, you know, that you've acquired recently, they should definitely have this stamp on it. And if they don't, it is worth just getting rid of the pallets and just recycling them down the tip, where they'll be burnt and destroyed. But if you're working with modern pellets, then pretty much every single one should be stamped. Well, every single one should be stamped. But the rules don't affect other timbers like plywood, particle board, as said, or barrels, wine barrels, if you're always going to get a load of wine barrels in your tree nursery, who knows, and wood shavings, wood ball, things like that. So there are exemptions to it as well. So don't become paranoid about wood waste within. And obviously, you know, structural timber and stuff like that has all been heat treated anyway. So really what we're focusing on is things that are going to get delivered with packaging material, and generally pellets is the main thing. I mentioned this last time on the hot composting. If you are going to do it, hot composting is better, and definitely ensuring that you've got that good mix of greens and browns and trying to keep it at a constant temperature of 65. And if your compost isn't working and it's not turning to compost, then don't use it. Just use its green waste, take it down the tip, just get rid of it, get it off site. And things like injurious weeds, so if you have Japanese knotweed or Himalayan balsam, spear thistle, docks, things like that, it's worth again not trying to compost those. Just get rid of them, get them off the site, and put them into landfill, because it's just too much of a risk really in terms, and will cause you a major headache if you get those things spreading within your tree nursery. Horsetail and things like that can be a problem as well. And to irrigation, hope I'm not going too fast, but I'm conscious people want time to ask questions, so we can come back onto any of this stuff. With irrigation, definitely a really important thing is to water and really do water. People are surprised quite often. They think they water the soils, but really your soil needs to be damp down to like 150, 250 mil, depending on what kind of soils you've got. That's quite a depth, you know, 6 to 8 inches. And in more free draining soils, really, you probably want it deeper than that as well. That's a lot of water, which means watering needs to be frequent to get to that point. And then you would let the soil dry a bit just to get the roots to, you know, look for water to encourage root growth, but do keep watering. And you know, this time of year, even though, you know, we're having some pretty wet July at the moment, the actual ground itself, if you stick a spade in it and open it up, it's still very, very dry. So watering is still going on in tree nurseries, I know. Pots also always need watering much more than trees in the ground. So, you know, if you sticking fingers in pots and just checking basically that it is damp enough deep down in that pot. Clean water reduces Phytophthora species, and what happens on big nurseries, if they have boreholes, then obviously the boreholes are tested. If you have reservoirs, the reservoir water is tested and things like that. The water bait test to test for Phytophthora. But in smaller community tree nurseries, I appreciate that they just be taken off a shed roof. And that's where I say if it's going into a container that's covered, then you massively reduce the risk of anything sitting in there. You know, Phytophthora could come in on leaf litter, which gets blown in the autumn and then just sits on top of the water, and that's it. It could put them potentially be in there and breeding. So do keep water butts covered, and if you can use clean water, great. And timing of watering again is really, really important. I'm sure you know this, but don't water in the heat of the day. In fact, watering in the morning is better, because what can happen if you water it late evening is that it doesn't have time to dry off the leaves, and then that can encourage things like mildews and so forth, you know, on the leaves if you're doing late watering, and then it's cooling down, and the water is still dampness on the leaves. But if you can do it in the morning, fantastic. Or if not, evenings is better, but definitely not during the middle of the day. And it sounds simple, but yeah, until they're watering the soil, not the plants. When you water over the top of the trees in a tree nursery, you know, if they're sort of up 8 inches, so 30 centimeters or so, then quite often a lot of that water just gets on the leaves and then spills off around the bed. And it's not actually really getting into the soil. Whereas if you can water under the trees, then you're going to have more direct contact with the soil. And as you will know, watering takes a lot of time. If you're paying for your water, it is exceptionally expensive. But there are different ways that you could water. So having a lance, which is like a long metal pipe, if you will, and then on the end of that is like a rose, and they're really good for getting in amongst trees and getting down to the ground. And also, if you've got lots of pots, it can be good for that. So lances and hoses work, and they're really cost effective. You want to step it up a bit, then you've got leaky pipes or drip lines. And actually, drip lines or pot drippers are better than the leaky pipes. So the leaky pipes are like these porous pipes which you lay out on the ground, and the water leaches out of them. But they can go through a lot of water quite quickly, and it doesn't always get right down into the ground, evaporate off. Whereas with drip lines, it's much more subtle, and you can water over a lot longer time. It's more efficient use of water, and again, you know, in terms of price, there isn't much of a price difference between those two systems. If you want to introduce sprinklers, then you need to think about whether you can get them under the plants. It depends on how tall your plants are, whether you can water under those to get to the soil or over them. The sprinklers can be really good, and misting units and things like that. But the problem with if you are going down the misting units, and in particularly polytunnels and things like that, you've then got all the Legionella rules and so forth. So that, yeah, it's just another drag basically. So I think if you are looking at sprinklers, then they're fine, and pop-up sprinklers work quite well, but they are definitely an increased cost. And then you can talk about automated or manual, because you may think that sort of these things are a bit high end, but in terms of time saving, they're absolutely incredible. You know, the amount of time we spend watering is a phenomenal amount of time. So if you can apply for grants, for example, and get yourself some capital monies together to install a simple automated or semi-automated, could even be solar powered watering system, you're going to save yourself a huge amount of time, and then you can spend that time doing all the other things you enjoy in your community tree nursery. And water storage, we talked about keeping it covered, but again, you can link water butts. You could get what's called IBCs, which are these like 1 meter cubes. units, and you can get them recycled, reused. Pardon me, they're clean, they're relatively cost effective, and they hold a cubic meter of water, a ton of water. And you can link those up in series, and you can very quickly accumulate water if you've got something that you can take water off, like a shed or a building or so forth, even polytunnels and that. So if you're going to look at one of these systems, also think obviously about water storage. And then we moving on to the plants. So when you've got your seedlings first coming up, the biggest threat probably is dampening off, which basically is a fungi, and it can absolutely crucify your entire stock if you have a dampening off problem, or them all being eaten. So it really is dampening off. There's various causes, and you can read about it. Definitely loads of information on the internet, because it could be it's too warm, it's too moist, there's too much water, there's not enough watering or watering at the wrong time, it's too humid. So you've got to sort of work out what your local conditions are if you have this problem, and then what you can do to potentially reduce the issue or stop the issue. And again, plant protection, as I said, stopping them being nibbled off, is you need to sort of work out what is actually eating it, and then you can work out how you want to protect it. And I've been seeds, whole seed trays, whereas actually there's nothing eating the seeds, but it's something eating the plants that have come up, but they're after the seeds that are underneath. So they'll go and like a wood mouse will just go in, and it will just go through the entire seed tray and just turn everything upside down. And you can come in the next day and all your seedlings that should, a couple of inches high, all died in effect, because they've just been uprooted and then left overnight by the wood mouse. So stuff like caging or just netting, very fine netting, that can stop those kinds of things happening. If you're transplanting them on, then again, don't do that until you've got adult leaves, and ideally 2 sets of adult leaves are showing. So not the first one, not the cut leaves, and hold it by the leaves as you transplant, and not the stem. As I say, it's just a very thin, fragile, hollow tube, and very easy to crush in picking them up. When you've got your seedlings going, like hardening off, again, seedlings and young trees is really crucial. And what I mean by that is that they've been inside, they've been sheltered against the inclement weather, the end of the winter. And if you just put them from there straight to outside, then they're really going to suffer stress, and potentially have losses. So it's better to choose the better days, put them out during the day, bring them in again at night, out in the day, and also until the frosts have passed, for example. Depending on species, some species are harder against frost than others, but hardening off, I would say, is really crucial point before transplanting them out into pots or into bare earth, into beds. But once they're out there, it's ensuring they've got the space to grow, and that depends on what you want as your end product. So if you are wanting to grow trees 40 to 60 centimeters high, then as I say there, plant them about 15 centimeters apart, on a grid system in your bed, so they've got the equal space around them, and that will encourage them to grow tall, quickly, and evenly. And you will find the ones around the edge often get quite a bit faster than the ones in the middle, or have a bit more leaf mass, but generally they will all do very, very well. But if you want to grow standards, so trees that might be 1.2, 1.5 meters, 1.8 meters tall, and you're going to encourage them through forms of pruning, then you need to think about planting those into pots, and then moving them on into a bigger pot and bigger pot and bigger pot, depending what the end size of your tree was. And those trees would need to be trained. You want to, depending on what you want. If you want a straight tree, then obviously you can train it at a straight branch, but you may want to do something more fancy with it. And very important to protect them again from predation. So the best thing, is to be able to rabbit and deer proof a site with fencing and gates. Other than that, then your biggest enemy is probably going to be drought and scorch. So with that usually comes around with something like shade netting. And depending on how you're growing, you may want to independently shade an area and move things in and out as they mature and so forth. Or you could just have a huge shade canopy and just grow everything underneath that. We in tree nursery I worked in, they used old scaffold nets, and they used some scaffolders. So these scaffold nets were end of life for the scaffolders, but worked really, really well for frost protection and sun protection, and also with that you're reducing transpiration rates, particularly when it's sunny, because they're more shaded, which means there's less watering that you have to do. So that's winner all round. But drought again, and drought doesn't just mean the weather conditions, hot summer, it just means they're not getting enough water. So you do need to check that they're getting enough water. And the trees will tell you if they're not, you'll see it straight away. Feed or mulch if required, and I'll leave that as open as that, because mulch is good, again, in terms of keeping moisture in the ground, but depending on the type of mulch you're using, if you're reusing those beds and you're using thick pieces of wood chip, then actually when you dig that bed over and want to reuse it the following year, it's going to reduce the quality of the soil, and also you might get a big breakdown of nitrogen, which can create further problems with future growth as well of plants if there's too much nitrogen in the soil. And finally, do always check for pests and diseases. I'd say, you look, when you go to the nursery, you usually will see if something's wrong, if you're going regularly enough, but definitely once a week, just have I think pest and disease, I'm going to have a look and just wander through and have a look. But definitely once a month, be a bit more thorough. And by that, I mean, actually go to selections of plants, different species, and sort of almost do a sample section and just check the soil, check the stem, check under the leaves, just looking for stuff that might be there. And if you find stuff, record it. And if you don't find stuff, record that as well. So you know that you haven't found something, and you know that you've done an inspection. These are all really good practices. They improve biosecurity, improve your plant care and plant health, and will ultimately result in better, stronger trees for you. So with the pests and the diseases, there's so much out there, honestly. It's not worth losing sleep over though, but there's quite a lot, and I'll go through some of those in a moment, but there's just some common ones. So the most common issues we've talked about already, drought and scorch. And on the left there, that picture, that's simply just drought stress on leaves. So there's just not enough water in the soil, or the tree can't get enough water into itself. Those leaves are just drying out and crisping up. And so you might look at that and think, oh, pest and disease, but it's not. It's just it's not got enough water. And the one in the middle, again, you've got that's a scorch from there. That'll be probably it'd probably be a sun scorch that's happened to that. I don't actually know because that picture didn't say, but you can get chemical scorch as well. So if people nearby are using herbicides, to spray something up and you get drift, then you will sometimes you'll get this kind of pattern as well on leaves from that. But if you have, sometimes you get a very heavy dew, and there's a lot of water on the leaf, and this can happen if you're doing late watering as well. So there's still water on the leaf as the sun comes up. And if you're having a really hot, intense day, then that sun on that water on that leaf just magnifies through and just fries it. So again, this can be an issue. But that's quite immature, in your nursery, you just get it exacerbated because the trees are a lot smaller, lot less leaf area, and that's why it's important to look after them. Or you'll see the yellowing of the leaves, and it's not always every single leaf. You may see some leaves within a part of your tree that are just much more yellow, or even sometimes it's quite variegated, so it's mottled. Some of it's yellow, some of it's green. That usually is chlorosis. So it could be, as it says there, nutrient deficient, or it could be a reaction to pest and disease. Or when it says a cultural problem, that's to do with the type of cultivar. You're less likely to get that with if you're growing native trees and even unless you're, that's more sort of for horticulture and for garden plants and so forth, and you think of different cultivars. And I was looking at RHS websites, and they had this list of over the years of sort of what the most common pests and diseases that get reported. And I would say that this also reflected my experience as well in nurseries. So obviously slugs and snails, first one, as they will quite happily come off and munch absolutely everything, particularly when you've got small seedlings and seed trays and that. Then again, with small seedlings, you've got damping off. And again, I mentioned about that in terms of it could be humidity, it could be overwatering, could be the soil itself is too moist, but the plants, they're just getting, so they're getting a mildew, a fungal buildup basically on them. So you need to look at that if you have got that and work out what it is, because it could also mean, because it's a fungus, that it could be in the pots, and if you're reusing pots and you're not keeping those pots clean, then you'd just be bringing it every time you fill it up and with compost and put your seeds in, your seedlings in, it's going to happen because it's already been in the pot. Powdery mildew, very common. Quite often, powdery mildew, I've heard people say you can sort of milk and water mix can have a good effect, but usually all it does is, I mean, in the worst case, it can defoliate a tree, but often it just sort of studs growth for that season. If it's quite significant. If you only had it on a few leaves, but it was a well-leaved tree, you could actually just take those leaves up. But if you've got it quite extensively, and the other strangely, it just seems to be all the field maple have powdery mildew, and what happens is the leaves then start to shrivel and curl up at the edges, and obviously reduces the photosynthetic area and the efficiency of photosynthesis, and so therefore studs their growth. But the next year it's not there, and they'll put the growth back on. So I tend not to get too concerned about that. Rusts, there's so many different types of rusts that affect so many different types of plants, and some of them will just stay on one host plant, and then others need to jump between different host plants to get to that adult stage. But rusts, you'll see them as spots, generally under the leaves, but they could be oranges, yellows, different colors. Again, it just depends on the extent of it. Really, there's very little you can do with rusts. Yeah, and if it's only on a few leaves, you could pick them up. But one of the better things is how you maintain your entire nursery. So, if you have in a good rake up of leaves and then removing those leaves or burning them up or composting them, however you want to do it, that is a good way, because what happens is a lot of the rust will overwinter on leaves, and then the spores come out in the spring, it rains, spores splash, spores go up, spores go on the new trees, and the cycle begins again. So, again, just having a tidy nursery, sweeping up. But if you're a tree nursery and you're surrounded by lots and lots of trees which belong to other people, it's just one of those things. So just, have to sort of tailor your response to your situation. With aphids, thrips, mites, weevils, all the things that are going to come out and eat and have a good munch, either underground or above ground. Some of the better controls for them are actually through biological control. So you could have areas of your tree nursery given over to growing certain types of plants, which will then attract the predators of these things. So a lot of the wasps, people don't like wasps, but wasps are very good at eating things like this. And so it's that one is probably one. The only other way you're going to deal with it is either by releasing good nematodes against the bad nematodes, which one's good, which one's bad, and so you've got to work that one out, or spraying, and using chemicals, and so I think if you can use natural processes better. I know that people also use things like what I'm looking for. Essential oils, that's what I'm trying to say. So they've used mixtures of different types, and there's lots of recipes out there using essential oils in water and then spraying that on and in the pan. That can work. Lavender, for example, can keep ants away and things like that. So quite interesting. Have an experiment. The ones that you may get but less likely to get are the cankers, because your trees probably aren't mature enough at that point to start getting the cankers. But if you were to grow larger trees, then that could become an issue. And those are things that you really want to be pruning out. And they will manifest themselves on mainly on the branches, the target cankers and things like that. Scab again on fruit, but if you're only growing trees for a few years, there's no way to get into the fruiting stage. So that's less of an issue. Same galls, if you were to get galls happening, particularly where they're interfering with seed production, that's again a much older tree. And the other one is the Phytophthora, which you don't want, particularly if it's Phytophthora rumorum or something like that. Because then you're into a whole different ball game. That's present, sort of disinfecting the nursery and so forth. So, and that can come in on plant material, on compost. If you're not composting, if you're using secondary compost from someone else and things like that, can come in on your shoes. So there are maps. Forest Research has maps where you can look at where these Phytophthora rumorum outbreaks are. So I would have a look at their website and see where they are. And if they are close to you, then just be more vigilant in terms of boot washing and good nursery hygiene. So what other things have we got? I'm not going to go through all of these, don't worry. There'd have to be an entire new, probably 2 or 3 webinars on to cover all of this lot. But just some interesting ones in here. If you grow box, then box blight is a real issue, massive issue in the southeast of England, as in box caterpillar as well. And I still find it amazing how many new housing estates I go into, and they've planted up lots and lots of box hedges. And then you can go back and look at them in 18 months, and they're all dead or significantly affected by box blight or by the caterpillar. So just again, be aware of that if you are thinking of trying to grow a box. It's a very, very, very difficult one to resolve. If you get it early enough within your plant, you can potentially prune it out. With the blight, if it's the caterpillar, no chance. I mean, you're literally into pulling caterpillars off and squashing them. There isn't anything else that you can do other than go to pay a professional to then come in and basically nuke it with insecticides, which is only for the caterpillar, nothing for the box blight. It's the fungal disease. Of course, chestnut leaf blotch, likely see that, and leaf miners, again, those two very, very common now. Oak processionary moth is areas of the country, again, particularly in the southeast and around London, where that's significant, and that will happen on the more mature oak trees. But the big caution about that is basically the hairs of the caterpillars can cause problems for humans, both in terms of rashes and breathing and things like that, if it close proximity. So, if you were to have those on trees near you, then I would certainly inform your local environmental health officers, and they may have, and more likelihood, they would have a process for actually eradicating it, and people come and rub it over and spray them and take the nests out and so forth. And I've already mentioned about the Phytophthora rumorum. But you can see that's just a simple list of what's already here and what can have an impact. And then these are the things that aren't here. We have had outbreaks of Asian longhorn beetle. But if you were to name pretty much any species of British native tree, that thing would kill it. And we've had outbreaks here, and we've managed to keep on top of it. But it's a concern. But the high risk, it says there, is wool packaging. So when I've been talking about this thing about your pallets, that's the kind of thing that you've got to be aware of. I'm not going to go through each one of these because you will get the presentation, but just to say, these are threats on birch trees, threats on Scots pines and Caledonian forest regeneration, On our ash, we've already got the ash dieback. If this emerald ash borer turns up, then say goodbye to ash. And again, oak, we've already got the acute oak decline here. And again, this would have another threat. So there is stuff out there, and I think cleanliness and hygiene and taking good care of your plants and keeping a tidy nursery and just doing some really, really simple things can definitely help you in terms of producing healthy trees and lots of them. So where we come to pruning, lifting, and grading, the things that happen before when you're getting those trees to go out for people to plant. So when you are going to be planting out, I've mentioned this before, you're going to be thinking about how you're growing your trees. Are they growing in pots or are they growing in the ground? What size you're growing to? So at the end of that, who is your market? Who are you giving these trees to or selling these trees to? So you want to grow to certain standards, basically. Because when someone wants a tree from you, whether it's donated or bought, they definitely want a tree that's going to have longevity. So they would be looking to have that tree for a long time, and so they want the tree in good condition. They want good root mass on it. They want it to have good form, depending on what kind of form they're buying, with a multi-stem or so forth. And so you need to have a good product, if you will, to give them these trees. And so you want to give those trees the best opportunity in terms of protecting them. But when it comes to actually planting them out, and if I think using a string line is very helpful. I mentioned this 15 centimeter. If you're trying to just grow trees, 40, 60 centimeters high with equal spacing, using a string line is a good way to do it, because not only does it mean you plant the trees in a straight line in the beds, it also means that you can work out exactly how many trees you can fit in each bed, and helps with counting at the end of the day. Once those trees have come up, you know how many went in the bed. You should have a record of how many have failed, and you have a record of how many trees ultimately you have of each species. When you're transplanting trees, the roots are the really, really important thing. So make sure the hole is big enough to take all the roots. When you if the hole is too small and the roots are just bunched in there, then the roots are going to start to coil, and they will ultimately bind themselves up. And really, you want a good hole so the roots can go in, and like this, they're not bending up or so forth, not twisted round. Backfilled, no air pockets, slightly tamped down, and then those roots with good watering will start to go out. And that's talking about bare root trees. Obviously, in that situation, if you're putting them into a pot and putting your seedling into a pot, then making a nice long deep hole, because usually seedlings just tend to have one big tap root with a few fine root hairs, and then lowering it neatly into that, and then tamping around that, and making sure again no air pockets within there, and that you're planting it at the right depth. So with your tree, you will see that there's the roots, and then there's a little swelling, which is the root collar, and then there's the branch, it's the main stem, which the branches and leaves are going to come, and that root collar should be at soil level. You put it below soil level, what can happen is the soil, in effect, and the moisture around there will just rot out the stem. So the tree has different constituent parts. Ones for being underground, ones for being above ground, and they don't like being the opposite way around. So when it comes to pruning, some people very much believe in root pruning, and it does promote vigorous root growth, but I've also seen it kill trees. If it's done too much root is taken off, or it's done at the wrong time of year. Some species just don't like it, and if you are going to do it, I would also say have a practice. So select some specimens and give them a go. So if you're going to lift them in the winter, which is normally when we're lifting our trees to go out, then in the spring do the root pruning. The spring before, do the root pruning. But it can be quite onerous because you've got to dig them all up very carefully. You've then got to prune them all, and then you've got to plant them all again. And I think if you're only going to grow your trees to 1 2 years old, then personally I wouldn't root prune. But I know other people have different opinion on that, and I've had good success. Particularly some people have lifted the oaks and taken quite a bit of the taproot off to encourage the growth of the more fibrous root system when they're growing bare root trees. So that has worked. But what you were looking to do, as I say, is lift the trees up and then using very sharp secateurs, chop off. If you chop off anything infected, disinfect. If you chopping off and you're doing all your oats, and then you're going to go on and do something else, walnuts or whatever, then again disinfect the blades so you've got clean secateurs between species. As the trees coming out, put them in a tub of water as well. Don't just root prune them, put them on the side, and you wouldn't be able to root prune and put it straight back in unless you got really good spacing, because normally you would be working in an area, say, 1 meter by 1 meter, and if you're growing trees like this for hedging or forestry trees, within that area, you're probably going to have 50 trees, so you probably want to do that batch, if you will, and then get them back into the ground. So when you've done that, weed the bed, prepare the bed, plant them again, make sure, again, there's good spacing for the roots, and water them in afterwards. Definitely water them in, and keep on that watering regime as well, because they will have shock because they've just been torn up the ground, chopped up and shoved back in. They will go into some shock, so it definitely needs a bit of TLC after that. If they're in pots, then you've probably all seen root bound plants within pots, and that's because it's been in the pot too long. So some modern pots, air pots and things like that, root trainers are designed so the roots will form, but then they will air prune because they come out basically of the pot and then desiccate, and then you get bulking root mass inside. But then you move those trees on at the right time, so they're not getting root bound. They've just got a really good, strong root system. Root bound is definitely when it's all really knotted and you lift it out and there's just hardly any soil space in there. It's just root, and at that point, really want to sort of gently make it a bit more pliable and then prune it off with a knife. You don't do too much, definitely never ever more than a third, and then get that back into a larger pot with some good soil, and again water it, and give it some TLC. With the branches, when you're pruning branches, well, it is going to be either to promote growth form, as it says there, or remove damage or infected plant parts. If you're doing it for growth form, definitely worth reading up about pruning, because there are different pruning techniques for different designs. You're going for a single stem with beautiful feathered branches, or you go for a straight stem, which is clean and it just has a tree head, if you will. Single stem, multi-stemmed, or are you doing some espalier? All of these are all different pruning techniques for them. So have a think about it. It can be great fun, can be pruning and training trees, and over a period of years, they are very resilient to it and very compliant as you tie them into lots of different shapes. But I think your pruning then generally is to say promote some particular growth form or get rid of something that's been damaged or infected. Where you prune back to, you really need to prune back to a good growth point. So you're looking for healthy buds. And some trees are very good with what's called adventitious budding. So almost you can cut anywhere and they'll just shove loads of buds and growth out. But other trees are less so. And so you need to seek good bud and then just cut back. But make sure you don't cut into the wood around the bud. You want to leave some space. And I can't say what the space is because it all depends on the damage to the branch that you're cutting and the size of the bud and so forth. So that's why I say really reading around. But you shouldn't really cut, as it says, to exceed a third of that of the parent branch. This can create, if you cut too much off, basically, one, you're removing a huge amount of energy from the tree, and then also creating a rather large wound, which the tree has to occlude around. And it can obviously go into some shock about that. Wherever you prune, you're potentially opening that tree up, like when you cut yourself, to infection. So largest wound sites, obviously, greater risk of some infection coming in. But definitely don't paint wounds. There used to be a time where people would stick Arbex on everything, and trees will naturally occlude. They shed branches, they lose branches, you know, through wind and storms and all the rest of it. They have a natural process to what's called occluding, where they will basically change the chemical composition of the wood at the point of the wound and basically build a barrier. And that barrier is very, very, very effective against fungi and pathogens and so forth. We talked about disinfecting and secateurs, but all your cuttings definitely remove as waste or burn them, because they, again, could potentially harbour something, if not then, in the future. When you're grading your trees, and you again, you need to think, what size do you want your tree to be before it leaves the nursery? And I'd say the minimum size is 20 to 40 centimeters high, root collar diameter 4 millimeters, and ideally go to 40-60s. And I'm talking about hedging and forest trees. This is because they are much more tolerant of transplant shock, drought stress if they're bigger. And if you go much bigger, so if you're going to a tree that's 3 meters tall, then that would need a lot of watering, you know, because that would actually have quite a lot of drought stress within it, because you remove so much of the root mass just by root balling it and then sticking it somewhere else. So there is a compromise over size and aftercare. But I would say work out what you're growing for. If you're going for forestry planting, woodland planting, hedgerow planting, then I'd say 40-60 is the ideal. If you're doing parkland trees and things like that, you might want to go for 1.5 to 1.8 meters tall and some formative pruning, because then those trees can go into guards and be guarded to protect them until they actually get, you know, much bigger. When you're trying to work out your size of your trees, the simple thing is to get a straight stick, just put 10 centimeter increments on it with a permanent marker, and you just pop it next to your trees. And you know, you can have a huge bed of trees and you can walk along them, and very quickly you can gauge what the average height of trees are within that. Because, you know, if you're again offering your trees as 40-60s, then you don't want to be giving people 30-50s. And you know, equally, if you are selling trees and you're selling 40-60s, but now you're selling 80-100s, but for the same price as you sell a 40-60, then you're selling yourself short. So measuring the trees is sensible, and check on your root collar. It's worth doing, again, just sampling. It's not every single tree, it's just sampling through with digital calipers. Get them really cheap Screwfix in other places. But again, that's a very quick way. You can just check. And part of the reason you want this thickness at the bottom is literally about support, and making sure that they can withstand being dug up, handled, transplanted, moved to site, probably dug in the ground again before they're then dug up again and finally planted somewhere. So it's about making sure the tree has enough robustness within it to tolerate all of that handling. And when you are doing your tree orders, just double check the tree order before you even start to dig the trees up, making sure you've got what the customer wants, the right choice of species, the right number of trees, the right size of trees, and so forth. And then once you've selected that stock, I would suggest that you do lift to order. So don't think, right, it's autumn, I'm going to dig everything up, and I'm going to label it all up and bundle it, and I'm going to put it all lovely and lined out into trenches. And it's better just to let the trees do what they want to do quite happily until you have to lift them for a project. And if you're lifting a whole bed and you want to sort them into different heights, then as I say there, just having on the table, again, very simple lines of measurement, 20 centimeters, 40, 60, whatever. And once you've dug them up, then lay them out, right? That's that size, that's that size, that's that size, that's that size. 20 of those, bundle them, tie them off, label them. Job done. If you're going to be taking them from pots or root trainers, the picture in the bottom right hand corner there of everybody's back, those are really good trees, with a really strong, robust root system that's holding the compost, the growing medium within them. But open them up and have a look. If they're root trainers, you can do it quite easily. If it's a pot, then you can take it out of the pot. An air pot you can undo, but other pots you might have to lift it out and have a quick look, just to make sure that they've definitely got good root development. If they're not, then it is because they probably haven't been watered enough, and I would return them and keep them another season to encourage the root development. And but once you've done them, then if you're removing them out of a pot, particularly out of root trainers, then that entire root mass is very liable to dry out very quickly. So you want to not leave them around. I mean quickly, like if they're opening for 5 minutes in a windy day, those are drying out really quick. Fibrous hairs on the outside of that will already be desiccating. So it's you want to really have your system set up, and then you've chosen trees, you've checked that, yeah, definitely got good root mass, right? Okay, we're going to do older, and then open up. We've got 20 alders, right? We're opening 5 root trainers, for example, and put them straight into the bags. Label them through. That's that. Next, so do have a system, an appropriate system for yourself. But labeling is absolutely key. You should know the species, you should know the number of trees, where that tree seed came from, what year the tree seed was collected, where it's been grown, and where it's going. And I would keep that record and keep that with the trees, because if you've got quite a few orders coming through and you're lifting and bunching and batching, and you mess up your labeling, then how do you know that you're giving the right stuff to the right customer? Sometimes you've got 3 or 4 orders coming through in a day, and customers coming to pick them up. So labeling is really crucial. But if you're batching potted trees, as I say, really a day before collection, because sat in those bags is not ideal. If it's doing your bare root trees, they are much more robust actually. So again, talking about one species at a time, but use your fork to open up the ground. The trouble with spades is you're cutting through roots. So fork ideally. If you need to actually cut some roots, then yes, you could use spades if it's appropriate, or use some secateurs, loppers if there's an odd big one. But get them out of the ground as gently as possible. Shake off all that excess soil, because soil is important. You want it in your tree nursery. And then have a big tub of water next to you and just put them straight in that. And the reason for that, again, is this desiccation issue. If you're digging them up and just lying them on the ground there, and you're going through your trees, and you've 50, you've done 100 trees, that first tree's probably been out in the ground, in the sun, and the wind, for 15, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Most of those fine roots at that point are dead. So you want to lift it, put it in a tub of water, lift a tub of water, lift a tub of water. Then once you've got the tub is full, or you then bundle them up and get them healed into a trench ideally. If someone was coming to pick them up in 24 hours, you could put those into a thick plastic bag, that the sun's not going to get through. So it would have to be like a compost bag that has compost in it, If you can, and you've got some leaves, put some leaf mold in, put some moisture in within the nursery, and then that will help those roots not dry out so much. But really, I would say you should already have prepared a healing in trench. You've already dug a trench, one side vertical, the other side angled, and then you put the trees on the angled side with the roots at the bottom, obviously, and then pour that soil back over, making sure there's no air pocket. But those trees are bundled, so you might have a bundle of 10, you might have a bundle of 20 trees, which means, and because the soil is just specially dug and turned, when you come to then lift it 24, 48 hours later, then it's very easy to get those trees out of the ground and then give them to the person again. covered over. People use Hessian, people use plastic bags. There's different products, but basically the roots really need protecting from drying out. The main thing. But if you're lifting trees and healing them into a trench, make sure they're watered as well. Don't not do that. And when you're taking your trees, again, I see so many trees. I've seen so many landscapers driving with trees in the back of an open van down the A38 or something, and these heads of these trees have just been buffeted and blown all around. They're not really secure very well. You're looking at snap branches probably coming up that. The root system. I've seen them where the bag is open because the flow of wind from driving the van is flowing straight into the bag. Again, all of those roots are drying out. That plant is shocked, and then that's going to your customer, and it's going to be, it won't immediately show, but it will go in the ground, and it will either struggle to get going or it won't get going at all, depending on aftercare and size. So definitely root drying, I would say, as I said, really early death after planting. You get them in the ground, say in February, by June, they're dead. So a waste of money, a waste of time and energy. So it's really important to look after them once you've lifted them. If they're not to be planted immediately, tell your customer to have a trench ready to get those trees healed in. Same as what you would do in the nursery. And they could stay there. They could stay there forever if they wanted to, but it wouldn't make a very good hedge. But definitely, they can stay in there right through the following summer if they can't get around to them, and then they could lift them gently and get them again in the winter. That's the beauty of broadleaf trees, is because they in the winter they go dormant. They are quite robust, and you can do this. And there are planting and aftercare guidance online. It's quite a nice thing to give your customer a tree care sheet, tell them how to look after those trees, not just immediately, and how to plant them, but also in the years to come. And again, you should really be giving your customer a supplier notice, call it what you want, invoice, whatever, but that should have on it this information, again, about species, where this tree seed came from, what year it was collected, tree nursery address, who it's gone to and when. So any future problems, or they can contact you, but also it's a good record for them, because I'm quite keen at gardening. It's always nice to know where I've got the plants and how long I've had the plants, how old the plants are, that kind of thing, where it came from, and so forth. So these records are good to keep. Mentioned this last time, for those of you, Tree Growers Guide. It is out there. It is a really good guide for those people who are starting up tree nurseries, and people who are still working with the tree nurseries. It covers a lot of species information in there, a lot of stuff on how to collect the seed, what to do with the seed, stratification, germination techniques. But there is also more and more further detail in there, but there's online content as well, which is expanding, and that's that's woodland planting design and hedgerow planting design, and there's some good case studies there as well. So it's worth looking at. But it's a neat little book, A5 size, very handy. So and this was those who were here last time. I did a plug for myself because I'm a freelance worker and I'm doing some work with Devon at the moment around community tree nurseries and biosecurity. And what I'm after is community tree nurseries to contact me, and we'll have a chat about the biosecurity. So I can gain a picture. What Devon was trying to do is gather a picture and understanding of the biosecurity within and around community tree nurseries. So and the fallout from that will be what support then can we provide to community tree nurseries to assist them if there are any improvements that are required. Are there any national standards that need to be established, or is it a case of we want to set up some window online information that they can access, so they can simply access information to improve biosecurity. So if you are running a community tree nursery and you would like to help with this project, then I'd be most grateful if you contact me, and we could pick it up from there. So we're going to move on to Q&As, and because you will get this presentation and it will also be online, my contact details are on there, and you know, feel free to get in touch with me, and yeah, let's talk and see how we can help each other out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. That was wonderful. And have a little.
With some time for Q&A as well.
Yes, we do. Yeah, absolutely. So I was wondering if we could start with, there's a few questions from the last session that we didn't get round to asking. I'm not sure if the people are here, but I'm sure that they will watch the recording if they're not. And it'll be useful for others potentially anyway. So the first one was from Alex, and she or he were asking, after stratification, do the sprouted seeds get planted up outdoors or put in relative shelter, such as an unheated greenhouse?
So if this is immediately from is this from germination? So this is, they literally put out their little radicle, but they're still seeds in effect, but they're just breaking dormancy. Is that the stage we're at? So with those, definitely, I would, for most species, not plant straight out. For the larger nuts, so things like your oaks, horse chestnuts, sweet chestnuts, things like that, you could put those into individual pots. I wouldn't, and protect them. The reason I say that is because of predation. You know, voles and will quite happily munch through those. Squirrels will come and dig them up. So if you put all of those in the ground quite beautifully, they probably won't be there the next day. So henceforth, those I would suggest putting in pots, and they could stay out. Definitely, they could stay out just like on the forest floor, as it were. To enhance your rate of success, the others I will put into seed trays. And you know, and it doesn't have to be a seed tray. People stratify stuff in buckets. People, you know, put them in troughs or large trays with whatever it's in, and let them come up. So if you've cold stratified them and you've just got the seeds in some small growth media, definitely get them out into seed trays, or you know, thin layers within buckets or whatever, and wait for them to come up, and let them all come up and get to a reasonable size, you know, with the adult leaves before you think about moving them on as well.
Right, that's lovely. Yeah, good. There's a question from the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust. If seedlings are being grown in back gardens and then being gathered at a central site for quarantine, how long should they be stored before being planted out to ensure they're disease-free?
So there isn't a simple answer typically to that one. I mean, you could say you should keep them for a year to allow it to go through this, you know, all the pathogens go through their entire life cycle kind of thing. But I think if where you're getting them from, those people have been growing them and not seeing anything on those trees, and so there's no reports of any issues with those trees, and then you were to be collating them, putting them into an area. And it also depends on the time of year, because if you're bringing them all in the winter, they've got no leaves on them, you actually probably can't identify 95% of the pest and disease issues that we have anyway in this country, because there's no foliage on them. So at that point, I would just say it's about the history, the prehistory, and if you know the prehistory, then that's better. But if you're bringing them in when they're all in leaf and in foliage, then I'd say it's worth keeping them for about 4 weeks, just to see if there's going to be any changes in that time. But that was really going to be from midsummer to late summer.
Yeah,
not a perfect science. Hope that helps.
no, exactly. That's great. And Claire Cater has asked, what's the best size root trainer
If
to
for
buy from a
growing
reputable?
trees,
Yeah.
is if you're using root trains for trees, then the maxi, because basically it's the biggest, and your trees are going to be in there potentially for 2 years if you're trying to grow them to sort of 40 centimeters height and taller. So you want as much compost growing medium as possible for that seed to utilize, because you don't want to be opening them up and then having to pot them on. The purpose of a root trainer is it stays in there until it's ready to go out and be planted. The smaller root trainers are for if you were doing fuchsias and garden plants or broad beans or sweet peas and things like that. They're much, much smaller, and they're like starter plugs, if you will, to get them started, and then you would move them and plant them into your borders and so forth. But because your forest trees are staying in there for 2 years, the biggest is the best.
Thank you. So going into the chat now for tonight, and Carol Douglas has asked regarding pallet collars, are they high risk in terms of pests and diseases?
I was going to ask, what is a pellet collar? Because that's not a term I'm familiar with.
So they use, apparently she uses them to build protection boxes to keep the cell-grown seedlings in before they're planted out.
I mean, yeah, unless Carol can qualify what a pellet collar is in the chat, I'm going to just assume that that is the pellet itself, as it were. So I'd say if they've got that stamp, they're heat treated, so there isn't a problem. They won't be bringing anything in. You know, that's the whole point of this ISPM 15. They're heat treated. But if you had a lot of, and you wouldn't be building these things with rotten pellets. You know, so, but that's more if you've got something that's historic, older, it's been led around for some time, it might not be heat treated. I mean, we now, well, what are we? We're 8 years past Brexit. We're probably, 6 years of this has been put in. I think a lot of the older pellets don't really exist anymore in the trade. It's more a case if they've been led around in someone's farm or garden, and then they're being used. They may be a bit more. They'd be a higher risk, and I just wouldn't use them. But yeah, they've got that stamp. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Okay. Marie is asking a little bit about ash. Where do I stand on growing ash from seed from a local source where trees are mature and appear in good health? Would it be best to leave it to the experts who are looking for immune trees? And if so, who's doing this work?
There is the Forest Commission is doing the work, and Forest Research is doing the work with designated commercial growers in terms of seeing about the ash. So we are not supposed to grow ash. We're not supposed to collect the seed of ash, and we're not supposed to grow ash. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And Moor Trees hasn't grown ash for almost 10 years now. So, we're not supposed to do it. But there are companies out there working with forest research that are growing it. So they're going out, they're sourcing trees which are showing good signs of resistance and resilience, and then taking the seeds from those and growing them on in controlled conditions to see what happens.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. And Nikki's asking how essential it is to have a polytunnel, fleece and hoops over beds. Would that be adequate?
Yeah, I don't think. I think a polytunnel is, if you've got space for a polytunnel, a capital for a polytunnel, and it's fantastic luxury, particularly when it comes to winter working, because you've got somewhere to shelter and have your tea and biscuits. But as they're quite good for bringing stuff on early, but for the most part, you're talking about if you're wanting to grow in much bigger numbers and bulk up your stock early. So I'd say it isn't essential to have a polytunnel. It's a nice to have. And yes, definitely fleece and hoops over beds can be very adequate for frost protection, definitely. And then you can take that fleece off and put some like scaffold netting over it. And I mean, there are products on the market, of course, which are much more expensive for protecting against shade and so forth.
Yeah.
Protecting against sunscorch, sorry, offering shade.
Lovely. So Kara's asking what the symptoms of Phytophthora. Is it possible to identify in small seedlings?
Symptoms of Phytophthora. It usually takes a plant sample to be analysed to say what species of Phytophthora it is. In terms of what physically happens to the plant and its death, so it's difficult. There are different Phytophthora basically, and they have different symptoms depending on what it is. But the most common one is this Phytophthora ramorum. But I don't know is the honest answer. I would have to look that one up. And again, Plant Health Risk Register has that information on it, and you can look up every single particular one of the 1,416 that they've got listed, and it will give you what the host plants are, what its susceptible, what its life cycle is, what it looks like, how to identify it, and so forth. So there is information out there, but yeah, off the top of my head, I can't answer that.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Adam at all? You can either raise your hand or put it in the chat, whichever. Hello, yes. Michael? Are you able to unmute yourself, Michael, or do we need to do that for you?
Was Michael waving? Because it just says he's
Or
left.
is he saying goodbye? I'm not sure. I thought, yeah, I thought maybe he was, wanting to ask a question. Anyone else at all for any questions? Marie is asking on the subject of elm.
No, you can go and collect wych elm and grow it, and you are encouraged to do it as one of the difficult to grow. Down's one of the difficult to grow species. Actually, it can be quite easy to get it going. The thing with that is go and find an adult parent tree. So if you can find a tree that's sort of 15 meters, 20 meters tall, that's not displaying Dutch elm disease, that's the tree to collect the seed from. And so the interesting thing about Dutch elm disease is it's got various vectors. So whilst it's carried basically on the beetle, and the beetle tends to fly around 3 to 4 meters high. So small elms and hedgerows, if you keep hedgerows small, they can look really, really healthy. But it's when they start poking their heads up and get to 3 or 4 meters tall, that's when the beetle gets to the tree, bores into the tree, puts larvae in the tree, and then the bacterial infection gets into the tree, pathogen gets into the tree, and Dutch elm disease occurs. So yeah, go and find a nice mature wych elm, collect some seed, and if you look at I think it was wasn't it, a few weeks ago, we talked about wych elm and when to collect it and what to do with it to get it to germinate as well.
Lovely. Rod, do you want to answer a question?
Yes, please. Yeah. One of the problems we've got is plastic, because obviously more and more people are getting more and more resistant to single-use plastic.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering what alternatives we can be thinking about when we're moving trees around and sanding them out and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. So is this for growing stuff in, or is this for packaging?
Packaging for whatever. Yeah, it's
okay.
just it's trying to reduce the whole lot from compost bags right the way through.
Yeah. There's always a place. I mean, there is always a place for single-use plastics. But you're right in terms of reducing the volume of that use. So some nurseries, if you're doing root trainer trees or trees that have been grown in small pots like that, they wrap them in cellophane, and I definitely wouldn't advocate that, which is why I'm saying actually the compostable bags that you get, like put food waste in, work really well. And but the issue is you need something that is going to keep the moisture in and is not going to allow the roots to dry out, which unfortunately plastic does exceptionally well when it comes to packaging. Because if you were to wrap it in paper, then that doesn't work. Wool has been suggested, but how you get hold of a source like that, or felt, for example. But again, they will still wick moisture away. but those sort of the paper and the card and the felt and the wool are I would say the elements that would offer a non-plastic option, if you will.
I was just running about greaseproof paper. I don't know. I've only thought about it.
Yeah, we've I say we when I was at Moor Trees, because I'm not there anymore. And we did use that. We bought a big batch of on a huge roll of greaseproof paper. The we just found it was very difficult actually to wrap. It was like Christmas,
Yeah,
you know, trying to wrap all these things and tie them up with string and not use plastic and not use plastic tape or anything like that. Use string and the greaseproof paper. And it was just if you're doing large volumes, it was very difficult and arduous and time consuming.
yeah.
So
I
yeah, I
thought,
think there's a solution to that one. With regards to root trainers, yeah, I mean they are thin, they're friable, and they're a great product. But you're right, in terms of the longevity of the product, it's not that long. So I think there are other things like in the last presentation talked about container wise in the torpedo pots, and they are much more robust. So although they're a single-use plastic, you'll probably be able to use them for 20 years as opposed to using a root trainer. You might get 2 growing seasons out of it.
okay, thank you.
Right, so I think we've got time for one more question. Alia Taylor is asking if we're collecting seeds and planting them in the same pot, how do we mitigate biosecurity risks? Should we avoid putting them in the same pot until we've had a chance to observe seedlings? Or is it okay if the parent tree looked fine?
So if you collected your seeds and you're putting them in the same pot, um, once those trees are grown, I assume the pot is then emptied, and it's at that point clean the pot and use either like bleach water or vinegar water or a product, a disinfecting product to clean the pot, um, and then dry store it. And then I again, so I would soak that pot and then scrub clean. You're going to reuse it, whether it's ceramic or whether it's plastic or metal, whichever. Do that and dry store it. And then also before you actually physically use it the next time, just give it again a wash, because if it's been stored for a year somewhere, then it's something that would be worth giving it a scrub again. So that I think, well, that is my answer, but hopefully that has answered it correctly.
Thank you. So we've got a couple of other questions. Shall we go for it, or would you like
Yeah,
to pass?
I'm happy. People are happy too. Yeah.
So Marie's asking about compostable cling film being worth a go in root wrapping.
I think if something's compostable, I would happily give it a go. Yeah, definitely. I think it's worth a try. I think the interesting one is how long does it take to compost, and does it need to be hot composted, to get it to start denaturing and breaking down, or so how compostable are these plastics? But if it's got a good record, and it's demonstrated that through trials and research that it's compostable, why not?
Oh yeah, good. And Peter's asking, what's your best alternative to peat compost?
Uh, Melcourt. Melcourt is a product, a producer. They do a seedling mix and a nursery stock mix. It's non-peat, really good. And yeah, I say nobody should be using peat, because we know that it's a very important fragile ecosystem. Um, and it might be non-UK peat, which is I
Yeah,
think just as bad.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Melcourt, as some people also use something gold. Going out of my head. But
Okay.
yeah, Melcourt's product I would suggest. And I'm not on commission.
So Rod's saying he's happy to help in any way
Thank
regarding,
you, Rod. Good to see you again.
yeah.
Cheers.
And we're having a lot of lovely comments. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation,
Oh,
brilliant presentation. So yeah,
no,
that's
thank you. That's nice to have the
good.
feedback as well. That is good.
Yeah, quite a few people who have left have put in their thanks as well.
It'd be
And
really interesting to know what community nurseries would like help with, to get some feedback on that. Will be
definitely,
really good. Yeah.
yeah. Moorland Gold, says Christina.
Ah, good old. Thank you.
And Anthony's just commenting, saying there's a difference between biodegradable and properly compostable. So
yes, yeah. Take the point.
And Marie says she's going to contact you regarding the biosecurity. So yeah, that's
thank you,
good. In my follow-up email, when I send the link to the recording, I can also include Adam's email again if you'd like to get in touch with him. I'd like to say thank you so much, Adam, for your second webinar.
No, not at all. It was a pleasure.
Really useful. Thank you for being here, and thank you everyone for coming this evening. And we'll be in touch about future events. Hope to see you soon at another one.
Thanks, Hilary.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Yeah.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.